Hi, everybody. Welcome into another edition. This is Cross Functionality, the show connecting coaching, baseball, softball, male and female, hosted by former college baseball and softball players. And of course, thank you for making us a part of your day. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Our topic is very interesting today, the proper way to coach your kids. It's a tall task to try and coach your kids, if it's one-on-one, if it's in a team setting, and we're going to try to figure it all out, dive into that topic today. So let me bring in my friend and co-host, softball national champion at the University of Alabama, and of course, current day renowned coach, Cassie Reilly-Boccia. Cassie.
Thank you, Jim. Excited to be here and also very excited to have a discussion about this topic because I think it is probably one of the most challenging things that I've witnessed as a coach and, experienced as an athlete. So
yeah,
excited for it.
By the way, we've talked on the program, previous episodes before. This is just a small little nugget. I saw this the other day. We've talked about the transfer portal. Did you know last week, I think it was last week or the last 2 weeks, there were over 1,100 kids that went into the transfer portal. For baseball? For all sports.
Oh, all sports. Gotcha.
All sports, yes. The majority of those kids, though, were college football. I was thinking about this over the week because I was listening to Joel Klatt of Fox Sports talk about it too. Because again, a majority of those 1,100 kids, it was 1,100 plus, right. Majority of them were in college football. And I'm trying to think how the transfer portal benefits college football. It does in, I think, many ways, because it elevates teams that had really good programs at one point, Colorado, for example, and Nebraska. But then thinking about the effects, trying to decipher through all of that with other sports. You played softball, I played baseball. Of course, there's other sports out there that don't necessarily generate as much revenue that the transfer portal may have a true effect on. I'm just, again, spalling here before, really amazed by that number of 1,100 people.
It is, it is interesting, and I do think it's going to be a little bit of a grass is greener on the other side type thing.
Right.
But I am curious to see what if those numbers. I think they'll spike, and then maybe they'll start to dwindle when you start to see, hey, 1,100 are in the transfer portal, and X amount are still in the transfer portal next season. Like, people have decided to leave and they don't find a home, or it doesn't end up being as better than what they thought. So I do think it's very enticing. It's new. Right. I'm unhappy with my current situation and I have a way out. And it seems like the easier path for a lot of people. So I am curious if those numbers are going to continue to rise or if we'll start to see a plateau and things start to settle a little bit. Just everyone's going to be figuring it out. Coaches, programs, athletes, parents, everyone is going to be trying to figure it out all at the same time.
How do you think it'll trickle down to softball and baseball and smaller sports like that? Because it has more of an impact, I think, in football and basketball. But with baseball and softball and those coaches trying to build up those programs and trying to have more of a disparity within those two sports, how do you think that transfer portal eventually in the next few years will play out? And will it help those smaller programs or make it worse?
I'm so torn because a part of me thinks, as far as softball goes, James Madison University makes the World Series a couple of years ago. They've never been on the map. They have a core set of really great athletes, really great pitcher, make the World Series. They beat Oklahoma in the first game. They make this noise. Now, I wonder if the transfer portal had existed, if after that first or second year, those couple of really good athletes would have transferred out and maybe not stayed at JMU. And I'm not saying they would have, but I'm wondering if it's going to end up hurting those mid-majors where you have some of the athletes that maybe go a little unnoticed during recruiting. They end up at a smaller school. They have an opportunity to make a really big impact. And then all of a sudden, after 1 or 2 years, they're getting plucked or poached essentially by these bigger programs, especially now, again, that NIL is a deal. It's like, hey, you want to stay there and just be on scholarship money? Or do you want to come here and actually earn X amount of money in NIL deals and have a chance at a national championship? So I am torn. I don't know if it's going to end up helping at first, but it's certainly going to provide more freedom to the athlete. It's going to provide opportunities for the athletes to make a better life for themselves. There are some really, unfortunately, crappy programs where athletes are not treated well, and it is a way that they can maybe leave those crappy programs. But yeah, I don't know if it's going to help the disparity as much in the beginning.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the NIL too, because Tommy White, who played at North Carolina State last year, has transferred to LSU because he's gotten that NIL money. And he's getting that opportunity now to make that side cash. So as a college athlete now, I guess you're it's like a side, you get like a side gig now. The NIL has been turned into like that side hustle, so to speak, as the kids like to say. So anyway, that's just something I wanted to bring up because we've talked about it on previous episodes about the transfer portal and how that might affect collegiate athletics going forward. Episode 21 today, again, talking about the proper way to coach your kids. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. Apple, Google, Spotify. Watch the show on YouTube, Softball Strength Academy YouTube page. I did see an article this morning from appliedsportspsych.org, and they discussed coaching your kids and how to properly coach your kids and some of the key points that you have to take into account. And one of them that stuck out to me the most was the positive effects of that and the negative effects of that, and how it actually will affect your relationship with that kid, whether it be one-on-one coaching or in a team setting.
Yeah, it's, it is so challenging. And I think I have a phenomenal relationship with my parents. But in the same breath, anytime my dad would try to venture into that coaching realm, it was almost like we didn't have a good relationship anymore. And it was very hard to balance. And I think, Coach Murphy talks about this a ton. He reads a lot of father-daughter books because I think he's in a little bit of a father figure, but he also just talks about how important that father-daughter relationship is to his girls. And so many times it's compromised because you have a dad that's trying to be a coach. And I think what's important to note is you can't be both at the same time. You can't be this really, really good coach and then also play the dad role. And also if you're going to be a really good dad, or your best dad, it's going to maybe sacrifice a little bit from the coach. And we have to try to understand that and hopefully be able to wear those different hats and know when to have that. But sometimes those lines get blurred and it's confusing for the kid. It's confusing for the parent. And I have to assume I have not experienced that myself, but in watching other parents through my athletes and through my teammates, it seems like one of the most challenging things that a parent can possibly try to do with their roles.
You know better than anybody how you would go every aspect of coaching and how you would go about coaching your future kids. And the one thing I've noticed with players who played in Major League Baseball, right, or softball players who played at some of the best programs throughout the country, they understand how to coach their kids because they take a positive approach. They take that negative approach too when it's needed, when warranted, and they know how to properly mix the two. And they also understand and get to know their child. Craig Biggio told me this once. He said, with Kevin, who's now, of course, at the Major League level with the Blue Jays, he said, with Kevin, I always took the approach of having a conversation with him because I knew that's the best way that I could get through to him. Having a conversation with your kid rather than just bringing out all the negative things that you did in the game or all the negative things you're doing in that moment as you're working and training.
Yeah. And, I talk to my athletes too, because I have some athletes who have such anxiety about their parents watching. And even, I was talking to one of my former teammates yesterday who is now a high school coach in Georgia. And she actually made the rule that everyone has to ride the bus home no matter what, so that her girls don't have to get in the car with their parents because it can be so bad. Yeah. And so I agree with you. That conversation is huge because you have to at least start to gauge with your athlete, with your daughter, with your son. Hey, when do they want to have this conversation? And sometimes 20 minutes after the game is not the time to do it. And, you and I have had bad games. Do you want to talk about the game and break the game down immediately afterwards? Probably not with anybody, let alone someone who is a parent who we already have a tough time receiving criticism from. So, I remember, I don't think my parents ever read a self-help book or anything like that about parenting, but they would always just say, how are you feeling? And I think just based on my response, they get an idea of if I was ready to talk about it, if I wasn't. And, they always enjoyed watching me play, even when I got benched, even when I played poorly. They always were like, that was awesome to watch you in your uniform today. That was great. And it was, I don't know. I just knew that my self-worth to them had nothing to do with my performance, which was cool.
Well, there's some breaking news here. You actually got benched?
I did. My freshman year of travel ball, I batted like 132. I had this, which I think I've talked about a little bit. I did horrible my first year of travel ball.
Yeah, we've talked about that.
And then my junior year of college, biggest slump of my life. There's 5 girls on the team that ended up starting my senior year when we won. And based on how the lineup worked with the pitchers, only 4 of us could play at one time.
Yeah.
So it was this cycle of like one of us couldn't be playing, and went into this huge slump. And for 2 weekends, I was a defensive placement, and I was just kind of put on the bench first time. My parents flew all the way down to Mississippi, and I sat the whole weekend.
So, okay. Now, when you're talking about with the parents and self-help books, for example, my parents, like yours, never read self-help books. Maybe it's they're thick-headed there. That's okay. I'm not going to read many self-help books either. But I'll say this, if there is one thing that parents should understand, and this is just my opinion, and I want to get your thoughts on this. If there is something that parents must completely understand, and this has to get through to them, it's actually, rather than trying to learn so much about the game, right, about hitting, about the swing, about pitching, whatever, learn more about how to help your kids away from the field, right? When to talk to them when they have a bad game, when to levy the situation when they have a good game, and keep things grounded, things like that. Again, having that conversation, that's a good way to coach your kids, so to speak, from home.
Yeah. And, I think being aware of your athlete has to start with you being aware of yourself as a parent too, because I see a lot of parents that have immense anxiety. They are so anxious about not doing what's best for their kid, or they're so anxious about missing something, and it just bubbles out of them, and you can tell the athlete feels it. And, it's obviously that's a hard conversation to kind of look at a parent that's much older than you. And I'm a new parent. I have 2 stepsons now that are 5 and 3, but I don't have to deal with a teenage kid, obviously. And to try to tell them like, hey, your anxiousness is affecting your kid, that's obviously a very difficult conversation. So I think becoming aware of how you're feeling, why you might be feeling that way, then all of a sudden you can then become a little bit more aware of your kid and try to say, okay, well, why is she shutting down on me? Why doesn't she want to talk about this? Or why, instead of looking at your kid and being like, why did you take that pitch down the middle? It's like, hey, like, how are you feeling going into that bat? Or, hey, did you seemed a little bit more relaxed in practice, and do you feel anything going into a game? And just start a conversation with that, because nobody likes to be asked, why did you take a pitch down the middle?
Right. And it's like, it goes back to having that conversation.
Yes, exactly.
Not so much, why did you take that pitch down the middle, but what was your thinking in that moment?
Yeah.
What were you looking for? What was your approach going into that at bat? We talked about an approach on the Lab Epstein Hitting podcast with 2 strikes a couple of weeks ago. What was your approach there with 2 strikes? Why did you take that strike 3? What were you thinking? What were you looking for? And then trying to kind of decipher through and get inside that athlete's head, to then now you can break through that wall and sort of make progress and help them along, get them to where they need to be, and make those adjustments.
Yeah, I do think, same thing with a coach. There's certain situations you can tell the athlete's a little tense and maybe doesn't really know why. Like they're upset that they didn't do well, but they don't really know why. And that's even more frustrating. So it's, as a parent, and then, as a coach figure too, it's, I want the athlete to do more talking. They don't need to be told what's going on. They need help trying to figure out, they need some questions that prod a little bit and say, okay, well, something that was really, because a parent can be really helpful. If you're a parent that's watching a kid's game all the time, it can be really helpful where you're like, hey, 2 weeks ago when you were playing, my dad used to say this. He's like, when you played Kentucky this one time, I just noticed, he's like, your rhythm looked really, really calm. He's like, when you guys played LSU, it looked a lot faster. Did you feel that at all? And I was like, yeah, I actually, I did feel a little bit more tense going into the at bat. And so it's just some slight observations that, again, there's a way to help the athlete. And probably too, my dad and I had talked about that in the past. So I think he probably realized, okay, this is a good conversation to have, because this is something we've talked about before, So I just think little things like that, like a parent's eye, can be really helpful, but it doesn't have to be the parent's job to break down the swing and say, hey, you're doing this with your swing, you're doing that, especially when you have a professional that you're trusting to help guide your kid in the swing or the throw or whatever that may be.
Yeah, and that conversation really helps exfoliate any little thing about that athlete's performance. And again, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on social media at Jim Tara and at Coach_CassieRB on Instagram, at Coach CassieRB on Twitter. All right, so when my dad coached me when I was like 9 and 10 years old, he used to tell me, don't ever call me dad when I'm coaching you. That was that rule. So I'm going to go something very elementary here and bring up this next point. Separating that role as a parent from the coach. The rule in my house, don't ever call me. My dad only didn't coach me very long, but the rule always was, don't ever call me dad. I'm coach. Which I don't like either, by the way, when it comes to baseball and softball. I don't like coach. It's always it's always the first name or not, or a nickname.
Yeah, you know what? It is interesting. I've thought of this too, like, hey, when I become a parent of an older kid, how do you handle that? Because I pride myself on being a really good coach. And if either of my kids want to go play baseball or softball and I'm looking at the swing, I need to probably swallow my ego and realize I might not be the best coach for my kid. And I think that's an important thing to realize. And so I do think, number one, it's removing the ego and being like, okay, it doesn't matter what I know, it's how my kid is receiving this. But then two, I think a lot of times, you know, something as simple as like not calling your dad when it's coach mode is probably a really good delineating factor. Because I'm sure when you were home, you called him dad, and then maybe you don't talk about coaching things when you're home. Now, I'm not saying this is every situation. There's some really healthy coach-kid relationships, but what I have witnessed is that the daughter doesn't know when it's her dad, and the daughter doesn't know when it's her coach. And she could get in the car after school, and it's 4 days after the game, and all of a sudden she got her coach. Or she could really be needing her dad because she's upset and she realizes she doesn't know if he has it or not. And I think that's at least what I've witnessed in teammates and in my current athletes. And it's hard. It's really hard. And again, it goes back to, I don't think the parent is aware how much that delineation of roles, or how confusing that delineation is, how much that's actually affecting the daughter.
So how do parents separate those roles then, from parent to coach, and how can they express that to their kid? Because there's an obvious distinction between the two.
Yeah, you know, I think it's getting to know the athlete, and then it's also it's kind of saying, okay, what does, you know, it's looking in the mirror and saying, what does my team need from me right now? It's what does my daughter need from me right now? And really, again, putting your ego away, getting awareness out of the way, and being like, okay, am I wanting to talk to her about her swing right now because I'm anxious that she's not going to do well, or is this going to be what's best for her? So constantly asking, like, does my daughter need me as a coach? Does my daughter need me as an athlete? And I'm not saying it's going to be a light switch. And if anything too, I think that the more and more conversations you have with your athlete, just honest, genuine, no agenda based, just, hey, let's have a conversation. You're starting to get to know your athlete. And in turn, that delineation, I think, will become a lot easier. And you might start to realize, you know what, my kid needs me as a dad on the way to games because she gets really anxious. And then my kid needs me as a coach maybe on the way home because it helps her to break down the game afterwards. And this way she doesn't have to worry about it when she gets home. Who knows? That's just getting to know your kid is I think, huge too.
I'm glad we're talking about this today, the proper way to coach your kids, episode 21, because right now, Jalen Hurts, quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, is lighting the world on fire. And for those who don't know, his father coached him when he was in high school in Texas. And it got me thinking when I was doing preparation for this episode, Cass, I was thinking, you know, maybe it's better if you coach your kids, male and female, if you coach your kids later on in life, when they're in maybe middle school, when they're in high school. Again, you walk that fine line of the favoritism and the reasons, the motives behind why you're coaching your kids at an older age. But I think the kids are more mature, and at that point, maybe more receptive, rather than when they're 9, 10, 11 years old and don't fully have that mental capacity yet to understand the approach you're trying to take in coaching your kids and make them better.
Yeah. And I think that's what's hard too, is not, because right here's another fine line. Should you actually be coaching if you're older? Like, are you just coaching because you are a dad or a mom, or are you coaching because you actually have an idea of how a coach can impact an athlete? And, what
you're talking about. Yeah. You know what you're talking
exactly.
about.
But what's so hard is like, okay, well, who else are you going to get to commit to that many hours of volunteer work or doing whatever it may be? So it's definitely not an easy job. I'm not saying this is like, hey, this is the easiest thing on the planet. But what I can tell is, like, anytime I saw a kid who had this really good relationship with their parent, who was also their coach, it was almost like I paid extra special attention. And I would joke, I'd be like, I almost want to interview you and I want to know what you did and what worked and what didn't work. And it was just such a mutual respect. It was such I'm not expecting anything from you. I love you unconditionally, regardless of how you play. And now we can have a relationship that has different hats. And I think when that foundation and that base was taken care of, it was very easy for the parent to hold the kid accountable. It was very easy for other parents to realize, again, this coach respects all athletes. It's nobody was bickering like, oh, she's playing because it's the coach's daughter, or coach's, he's playing because it's his son. I think developing that foundation, developing that mutual respect, and that has to lead to so many healthier conversations, healthier relationships later on down the line.
So when you talk about saying to a kid, hey, I'd love you no matter what, that's part of empowering the athlete, right? And kind of understanding where they're coming from, empowering them, and not just using the old, cliches, do this, do that, getting them to understand why you're telling them to do such a thing. And in case in turn, you're empowering them.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? And again, I'll bring up Coach Murphy probably every other week, just because, he was
a guest co-host. That's okay.
There you go. So he started this really cool thing a couple of years ago at the program where he would call up the parent and he'd say, hey, we have our senior meetings. I'm going to call you at 5 o'clock, and we're going to put you on speaker in the team room, and you're going to talk to Kaylee Tao, and you're going to tell her how much you appreciate her and whatever else, and anything you want to say. And it was a voice recording or a letter written, but whatever it was, but they'd get the dad on the phone, and the dad would just be like, Kaylee, like, I can't tell you how much I've loved coaching you at your entire life, how proud I am to watch you, blah, blah, blah. And it was, it's funny because the parent is like, well, of course my daughter knows that. But the daughter's like, well, I've never heard him say this, and it's like everyone's crying in the room. It's this big emotional moment, whatever it is. And it's just providing that opportunity, providing that platform to say that, because again, it's so easy for a parent to be like, well, of course my kid knows I love them, but maybe they don't, and maybe they haven't heard it and they need to hear it. I just think that was one of the coolest things that program started doing. And I know he got it from another program too. So again, an opportunity to voice how you feel to your athlete, I think, is huge too.
Where in the world is Patrick Murphy this weekend? He's in Wisconsin. what I saw on Instagram.
Yeah, he's all over.
It's no wonder though that he's so successful as a head coach, and he's had so much success and a very deep and enriching type resume when it comes to his coaching career, because he comes up with these. And I know you mentioned that he didn't really come up with that idea, but he understands which ideas to filter through and take for his program that could really help. And it's, again, an out of the box type idea that's good for his athletes. I mean, there's a lot more to coaching than the proverbial X's and O's, obviously. And I think if there's anybody that understands that the most, it's Patrick Murphy.
Mike Candrea, he coached at Arizona for years. He just retired, I think, 1 or 2 years ago. And he has this quote where he says, guys have to play good in order to feel good, where girls have to feel good in order to play good. And the quote always used to get me a little bit, because I'm pretty sure the grammatically correct way is to say they have to play well in order to,
Yeah, it's like using 2 and 2 and 2 in the right context.
But I think, again, that's like when you have a dad who's coaching a daughter. The dad has grown up probably playing baseball, let's say, has his entire life had to play well in order to feel good about how he is doing, and maybe doesn't understand the translation. Well, my daughter needs to actually feel really good before she can start to play well. And that might be the biggest communication gap sometimes, in that, where it does matter. And like, people might roll their eyes that like a girl needs to have her hair done before a game, but like, you know what, if her hair is done, she's going to feel that much more confident in it for whatever reason. And it's just, again, it's having that conversation. It's real, genuine, honest conversations with your kids, just like a really good coach would do with their athlete. That shouldn't be much different.
I got to be honest, and you might laugh about this, I think it's the same thing for guys too. If they look good, they feel good, they play good too. Listen, when I go to the gym, I do want to put on some really good stuff, right? But also gym attire that fits me well. But I know that if I feel like I feel good, or feel like I look okay and don't look like a complete slob, I feel like I work out better. We just peel back a piece of the onion there.
There you go.
Episode 21 of cross functionality. I peel back a lot more of the old proverbial onion on the Lab Epstein Hitting Podcast this week, episode 125, discussing Cody Bellinger and how to fix his swing going into 2023. now new Cubs outfielder. So please tune into that. Apple, Google, Spotify. New episodes every Monday at 9 a.m. You know, I find interesting with parents of kids who are 8, 9, 10, even 11 years old. At that age, for some reason, and my dad pointed this out a long time ago, all of those parents think their kids are going to the major leagues.
Oh man.
And I could tell you, right, I'm guessing by your reaction, you completely agree. And I could tell you that I look at a guy like Dansby Swanson right now, right? You would think that guy should be signed by somebody, yet he's a free agent. My point is, what parents don't understand is that with Major League Baseball, I'm just talking from a guy's perspective, because you get a chance to play professional baseball, and with softball, right, not as much. With parents, though, who younger kids, 9, 10, 11 years old, they don't have that perspective that Major League Baseball, professional baseball, is a business. And that is the worst mindset you can have in thinking, hey, I'm going to get my kid to professional baseball, or I'm going to get my kid, drafted out of high school, or get him to this big name school. You're worrying about something that is way far down the line rather than what's in front of you, in trying to actually develop your kid. And in turn, I think it really affects you coaching your kid, because that intensity, it's probably too much at that point.
Yeah. I mean, it always blew my mind how frustrated parents would get with kids at that age, where when you look at any developmental book, any research, the number one thing that kid needs to be doing right there to actually ingrain any motor learning or anything like that is actually having fun. Because even the hormones that are elicited, if they feel like they're in a stressful environment, feeling like they have to do something versus just wanting to actually go do it, is completely different. And that even affects how they learn their motor skills. So it is wild that there is this frustration and pressure that like oozes at a parent sometimes. And the other thing of it too is like redefining success, right? We're trying to empower this athlete. We're trying to get them super confident. We're trying to make them do hard things and accomplish hard things to make them feel really good about it. There is a potential athlete that exists inside them, and you're trying to get them to achieve that because you know they're going to be really proud of that. But we have this weird misconception that if we don't push, we're going to miss the boat on making our kid a professional. And that is, I think, the biggest miss that coaches and parents have right now with younger athletes. We're not like, again, you could make an athlete faster, but you can't always make a slow athlete fast. You know, you can make an athlete better, but we're not going to make a mediocre athlete into a professional. Genetics will always be king. And, you know, again, we can work with athletes, but we're not going to, you know, there's a reason not everybody who pays for training is turning into LeBron James.
That's right. That's right. What advice then would you give younger parents in coaching their kids 9, 10, 11 years old?
I think just make sure the athlete understands, like, hey, today was a huge success. Like, did you have fun today? Yeah. Okay, cool. That was awesome. That's exactly what we wanted to get out of today. I went to that scout game with the Red Sox and Yankees, every scout in the country there. And they said the number one thing is for you to enjoy your time playing today. We got to have an opportunity to play outside. Everything else falls and trickles after that. So, hey, if you're enjoying yourself and you end up getting a double, awesome. If you're enjoying yourself and you end up striking out, nope, it's no big deal. You enjoyed yourself. You enjoyed your teammates. You enjoyed, like, you got a little bit better that day. And again, just not hanging your hat on the results. They're going to have a lifetime of having to struggle through results because they're picking baseball and softball. You know, it's let's teach them how to enjoy and love the game. And, you know, there's a lot of intricacies of the game that I think get lost, and it should be enjoyable. That's the number one aspect. Have fun with it and go from there.
There was one feeling from my childhood that I could recapture and hold on for the rest of my life, and I can point back to every day as a positive. It's that feeling you get when you wake up either on opening day when you're younger in the Northeast, as it were, that opening day in April, or when you're getting up in the morning for that big travel ball game, the districts, the states, even the regionals, if you were lucky enough to get that far. I want to be able to retain that feeling. And that's something that I think parents should nail down in their kids about. About that feeling. That's a feeling that you're never going to be able to recapture again. So hold on to it, cherish it, and live in that moment. If there's ever a lesson of how parents should coach kids, I think it brings up that point of, hey, be in the moment in that day, of that feeling that you have when you're waking up for a huge game that you're trying to win, because that's something that's going to stick with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Gosh. Yeah. I mean, I used, like, waking up on game day is I don't get that anymore. You know, it's, I
Right.
get excited like for certain things, but there was just something about game day, the morning of game day, the morning that you knew you got to wear a uniform that day, you knew you got to play today. And if we start to really focus too much on the results over the process, and we miss this opportunity to teach athletes how to enjoy something, they're going to miss out on one of the best feelings from our sport.
Well, I hope we helped everybody out today in how to coach their kids. And, you know, if you have any questions, email us jimbopodcast21@gmail.com. Cassie's the expert, so she can certainly help you out with that. I think we hit on everything today, right?
Yeah. And it's, you know what, again, it's one of those things where I'm speaking from observation, and I'm speaking from what I've witnessed through my athletes, from that perspective. But I'm not a parent of a high school or an 8, 9, 10 year. I haven't actually played that role. But again, I can tell you what the research says. I can tell you how my athletes respond, and I can tell you what I feel has worked for me as having a parent who also helped out coaching. So hopefully we got something out of it. But if there is, I think any question from a parent would be super helpful to hit on next week.
Yeah. Email us jimbopodcast21@gmail.com. And next week, we're discussing developing a player's intangibles, you know, the intangibles about a player, not so much the physical stuff, but the intangible. It's going to be the word of the week next week, episode 22 of Cross Functionality. So again, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a review. We would appreciate that. What do you have coming up at Softball Strength Academy? What do you have coming up on Instagram? What do you have coming up with all the drills?
Yeah. So actually just got back from Georgia last night. I was there for 21 hours. Had a really cool opportunity to speak to about 40 high school Georgia coaches. And got some really cool insight, just some really cool questions from them. And so I'm filming more episodes on Wednesday, or more posts, I should say, on Wednesday. And I'm excited for that because any feedback from people, any questions I get from other coaches and parents, that's usually what I end up trying to post about. So be on the lookout for additional posts. And then, as always, the drill vault with over 500 drills has been live. That's been added to. There's tons of concepts, tons of descriptions, all organized. And actually, for the first few hundred people who are buying it, anyone who I reach out and anyone who wants to, I'm scheduling a 10-minute meeting just to receive some feedback from them on what they think. So I'm trying to make it better every week for you guys.
Where can they reach out to you?
Sure. So on Instagram, you can send a DM, and the link is right there to purchase the vault. So once you purchase the vault, you get an email from me that says, "Hey, thank you so much. If you want to give me some feedback, here's a link to Calendly to book a 10-minute meeting."
Cool. All righty. Well, thank you everybody for listening. We'll talk to you next week, episode 22. Have a great week, and thank you again for checking us out. Take care.
Thanks, guys.